Welcome to the 96th episode of Dialogika, a podcast between two friends about the latest in society, politics, and feminism in Indonesia and the world. I'm Stephanie Tangkilisan.
And I'm Suidian Lee. And this week, we're not going to talk about COVID-19 because we could all take a break from COVID-19 news.
There are other that are also important to talk about.
So for this week, we're actually going to talk about the verdict that was given out to the Novel Baswedan acid attack case last Thursday. We'll talk about how it's a very disappointing verdict and break down to our listeners
why it's a disappointing verdict. And we're going to also do a refresher on who Novel Baswedan is, what he's done for our country, and just talking about the nature of corruption in Indonesia. It's a really uplifting one, guys.
In case you didn't get that was sarcasm.
Essentially, for us, this case is not only a disappointment to Novel Baswedan's case, but a disappointment for the fate of our Corruption Eradication Commission in general and how it shows essentially the weakness of our system as it is today.
So, on that really uplifting note, here's to it.
Hakim menjatuhkan vonis bersalah terhadap dua pelaku penyerangan Novel Baswedan. Bagaimana pendapat Novel Baswedan atas vonis yang dijatuhkan hakim? Sudah bersama kita penyidik KPK Novel Baswedan langsung dari kediaman Mas Novel. Selamat malam, Mas Novel.
So who is Novel Baswedan, Soy? For people who, maybe are not familiar, heard his name in passing and, kind of forgot who he is.
It's been a while. And if you're not
it's been a while.
Yeah. If you're not constantly reading the news, you don't really know who he is. You might have heard the name, like Stephanie said. Novel Baswedan is one of the chief investigators at the Corruption Eradication Commission, or KPK. And for the last few years, he's really been championed as the hero of Indonesian justice, really going after the big guns when it comes to corruption, like going after high-profile politicians, judges, police officers, and really not being afraid to ruffle some feathers and make some enemies. And he definitely made some enemies. Made a lot of enemies. Yeah, that's part of why this acid attack case has gotten a lot of attention. Not only the fact that it was such a brazen attack, but it's also who could be behind this. There's so many people who
hates him.
Yeah, honestly have a reason to want him dead, to be honest, right?
I mean, the acid attack isn't supposed to be an acid attack is not when you want to kill someone. An acid attack is when you want to intimidate someone and intimidate others who are doing what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
Which I thought was kind of a interesting choice of attack, right? Why acid attack?
Yeah.
Prior to Novel and this kind of really brave corruption investigators, KPK has previously been more of a symbolic institution where, definitely there were cases where they catch the business trying to bribe a corrupt lower level judge or a corrupt lower level minister, and that's kind of the era of KPK where, there's this big case where a businessman was caught red-handed trying to bribe an official with $200,000 cash, which is a sizable amount, but this is not a systemic type of corruption, which is complicated and involves power and complex bureaucratic systems. This was more straightforward,
white-collar crime.
straightforward cases of corruption, right? And
yeah.
It's not, while, important to catch, it's not the same thing as what Novel has done, which is more focused towards large systemic cases of really influential, powerful figures such as Setya Novanto, who was the former Speaker of the House and chairman of the Golkar party, one of the biggest, most influential party in Indonesia. And he was indicted and sentenced 15 years for stealing $150 million out of a fund of $440 million for electronic identification cards, for example. there was different cases involving the Bank of Indonesia and also the arrest of the head of the Constitutional Court and, the head of even like the former head of the police itself, Budi Gunawan, which, that was a big case that Budi Gunawan actually managed to get off that case. But so there's just like some serious, really big guns that he tried to catch and successfully caught.
And that's the whole thing about corruption in Indonesia, right? The reason why KPK was established was not to prosecute the small fry cases of businessmen doing, whatever it takes to ease their business or whatever. It's really call out these people and really like bring the case towards them. And these are high profile names and there are certainly huge consequences if they get this wrong, right? But Novel has always been, the way he positioned himself and his team has always been, anything for justice, right? Like their ultimate goal is not trying to win favors or trying to, talk things out. It's about what is right. And I think that was such a refreshing kind of like thing that was happening when Novel started doing the work he was doing in KPK. And a lot of people, a lot of netizens, a lot of the population loved him because it was like,
we love him, right? Like
he dared to speak and say what we all have been thinking.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit more about Novel was his background is he was a police officer from 1999 to 2005, so about 6 years, before he was kicked upstairs to the headquarters of the police.
Capital P Police.
Yeah, Capital P Police. So what happened, what led up to why Novel is back in the news again?
I think, right, like pulling back a little bit just to recap what this asset attack was all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
On April 11, 2017, Novel was walking back from his local mosque after morning prayers. So this was in the morning at dawn. And then he was attacked by two people on motorbikes who threw acid at his face. This was during the time when Novel and his team was investigating Setya Novanto and the electronic identity card corruption case, which was a big case that involved like millions of dollars. And it was on the news all the time. So Novel was on the news all the time and certainly made a lot of enemies. So this was happening during that time. A lot of people speculated that this acid attack had something to do with that time. And the whole thing about there were reports that other people were watching his house prior to this attack. That definitely fed into the whole, this is not a lone wolf kind of situation, that there's a mastermind behind this. Mm-hmm. But after the attack and Novel was being treated at various hospitals, there was no real traction in terms of the investigation, even though President Jokowi had pressured the cops to really look into this, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard, as Stephanie said, it's cops investigating cops. It's hard to really push them to be impartial in this case. And actually, the case itself was under investigation for 2 years without any major leads. And it's only late last year, in like December, where they actually made arrests of two police officers, Rahmat Kadir and Roni Bugis, who are the ones that have been sentenced just last week. So a lot of this just felt like, honestly, like show trial, right? Like, are these just scapegoats that was caught and sentenced in order to basically
and even
close
the
case?
Scapegoats are not getting serious, like,
yeah, exactly.
That's the other thing, right?
It's not
like,
even real scapegoating.
It's like half-assed scapegoating.
And it just felt like they're tying the bow in order to just like, let's finish this. Let's just close this case, resolve it, whatever.
Let's just say we got justice, like.
Exactly. And that's part of why for Novel, this whole thing from the very beginning, from when he was first attacked, he knows this is much more than just a couple of police officers who are angry at him.
Yeah.
He knows there's bigger fry behind this. But clearly nobody was interested in really going after those. And I think that's why after this verdict, I mean, he's not surprised, right? And he certainly is disappointed. This is much more insulting than the actual, the justice that he's seeking is not that these two police officers be sentenced.
It's not for him necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Proses terjadi dalam persidangan begitu banyak kejanggalan dan begitu jauh penyimpangan dari fakta yang objektif yang ada. Begitu juga tuntutan yang dilakukan, baik pasal-pasalnya, fakta-faktanya, maupun besarnya ancaman hukuman yang dituntutkan, itu jauh sekali dari rasa keadilan. Dan ini seperti justru menghina penegak hukum yang berantas korupsi, dan menghina proses-proses lainnya yang berjalan dalam penegakan hukum yang fair dan jujur.
This is for him, I think. And I think for us, it should be an insult to our democratic process as a whole, right? Because he symbolizes someone who is the best of what our country has to offer. He is kind of one of the best countrymen.
Yeah.
And if this is how he's going to be treated, what about the other investigators, right? Because every time he's been interviewed, he's always like, okay, this is just one case. This is me. And this is the one where everyone's public eye is on it, and this is what happens. Whereas there are tens, if not hundreds, of attacks to other people in the country who are trying to expose corruption, and no one is seeing that, and no one is making sure that justice is being carried out. So what is the incentives for people who want to eradicate corruption in Indonesia? There's no protection. There's no justice. There's no protection, but there's not even justice after the fact, right? Like, that's kind of what makes him so enraged. Like, why is there no shame?
Yeah. And I think, when we were watching the news and when we first heard of Novel Baswedan and his rise to acclaim and doing all of the good work, it was during a time where I felt like there was a great sense of optimism.
Yeah.
In the Indonesian political system, where it's like, okay, Jokowi, was symbolizing all of this promise and change against the old powers of the past. There's KPK. There's a lot of things that feels like, oh, there is hope for a truer justice, a truer democracy.
Yeah.
And then this happened, and then it's just sort of revert back to default.
Right.
How things have always been.
Yeah.
And it's so
and
disappointing.
one thing Novel has noted a couple of times is that, and it's true, Jokowi has said that he wanted justice for this case. Jokowi came out pretty quickly after this happened to say that, justice and this needs to be investigated properly and thoroughly, and it has not been. And if you want to take a political analysis of it, to me, this just seems like Jokowi does not have the power as president to protect his men.
I mean, the reality is a president of any country, unless you're a dictator, does not always have the sole authority or power. They have to work together with other forces at play. Whether that's in the judicial courts, in the legislative courts with the politicians, or in the police and military, right? And that's the reality of the situation for somebody like Jokowi as well. He has other people that he has to work with.
Yeah.
And the reality is, as we've seen, even if he wants this resolved, it didn't get resolved. He had to go through a couple of police chiefs in order to get this thing resolved. And even then, the resolution is like this.
This is not resolved.
Yeah, this is just closed. The case is closed, but it's not resolved.
Right.
And I think for me, this felt like a litmus test, right? Not to make a pun on the whole acid thing, but this felt like a litmus test for KPK and for the idea of KPK.
Yeah.
Can there be a true independent body that is trying to pursue true justice for the good of the people?
And the answers are a resounding no, right? I feel like this is kind of the beginning of the end. Well, it's been declining for a while.
It's the end of the end.
But not because of, the actual KPK prosecutors, but in terms of the power they had. This has, I think, significantly weakened them in the future as well, right? In terms of who they can investigate. And, well, they can keep investigating, but the more they investigate powerful people, this means that if you are a brave KPK investigator, you can do what you want, but there are going to be consequences of that.
Yeah.
When no one will protect you. The justice system will not protect you. The country that you are trying to protect will not protect you. And I think that's kind of what's so troubling about this whole case. from start to end.
And, it's like, Novel was attacked in 2017, right? He took a couple of months
In broad daylight. With witnesses.
He took a couple of months, I think up to a year, before he came back to his work. He still went back to work at KPK.
Yeah.
But it was clear.
So he's
he's incredible that he still went back, even though he was blind in one eye and half blind on the other. But he's definitely, like, you could tell it significantly impact the kind of impact that he could actually do, right? He was no longer going after the big guns. A part of it is because I don't think he physically can anymore. He's like too high profile or whatever. But it just shows, like, I think from the moment the acid attack happened and then there was this lack of true investigative power behind it, I felt like that was the start of the end for KPK. And, there has been reports, right? People have been saying, like, Jokowi, reports behind the scenes that Jokowi really wants this to be dealt in a conclusive way.
Yeah.
Actually, like, not just for show, right? But he has no power in this sense. Like, whatever the court decides, the court decides. I don't think even the president, like, he's not gonna risk his political capital to get involved in that way.
Yeah.
And that just shows, like, how disappointing the whole system is here in Indonesia. And I think that's what a lot of the reactions from people who have been following the news has been. It's just disappointment at what could have been a great example of true justice being meted out on behalf of a
deserving son of our country.
Yeah.
Well, it's also, I think, in a way, like, unfair to blame this all on prosecutors as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the way our justice system, I think this was, like, something I found really interesting, listening to hours of, like, debates on this on YouTube, but from Nacho's interview with Novel and other people who understand Indonesian law. But essentially, and this is true, like, prosecutors can only go forward with charges that they can ensure that they can win. And this is based on police investigation. So if they don't have any investigative proof from the police, they can't really charge more than what the evidence portrays, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of like an issue as well. This is a problem stemming from the police department. And of course, like, the way KPK does it is they have a special jurisdiction as prosecutors to investigate further, but not all prosecutors have this special power and authority to investigate on their own what happens and what can lead to their own charges.
And the reality is, all of these things that we're talking about, they're not tied to one person in a way, right? We're talking about this in the context of the Novel Baswedan case, but the reality is he's one of our deserving sons who has honestly been tarnished in this case, both physically and career-wise. But he's only one of the people, right? Like, the system itself has so many issues that allow for this kind of paltry justice be meted out that I don't know how to fix it, right? Like, we all thought that, like, KPK could be the start of a new wave of institutions or some kind of, like, new system that could introduce real fair procedures and justice. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, Jokowi signed a law that severely diminished the power of KPK and its autonomy. So, one, I think the KPK is pretty much dead at this point, symbolically. And then, I don't know how long it'll last. It puts a negative viewpoint on the future of Indonesian justice, in my opinion, this result. I'm not surprised, but I'm definitely disappointed.
Yeah.
And now, it's like, for Novel himself, like, this case is resolved, but it's not resolved, so what's next for him? We don't know, right? Like,
I think he just gotta keep working on what he does best and in the way he can, but I think it's gonna be hard for him to not lose faith. Like, I think he's lost faith in the system, and I think he's just gonna keep doing his best with whatever he can and whatever he has.
Yeah.
And, like, honestly, for me, if he doesn't choose to do anything else from here on out, I don't blame him, and I'm still thankful for his service.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think he has to me. Like, and I think to most people, like, he's done enough. I applaud him. He's braver than I could ever be. Like, he doesn't need to prove anything to anybody else anymore. And I just want him to be happy and safe in a way. If that's weird? Like,
No, that
I
makes
just
sense.
want the best for him. And I just don't want him to feel like pressured to do more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I mean, we gotta applaud him, right? Like, he was attacked, he took almost a year to recover, and he still, like, bit back, right? He was, like,
Yeah.
not only going back to work, but also, like, we need to find the people who did this.
Yeah.
And get to the bottom of it, even though any reasonable person, like, certainly me, I don't think I have enough courage to,
To try get justice for yourself.
yeah.
And he's right. Like, I think, you know, like, what he's been saying is that there are people who are really influential behind this.
Mhm.
I think that's also bravery to say that, as opposed to, like, taking it, laying it down, because, you know, whenever he speaks out, he's risking more and more things that could happen to him, you know?
Yeah.
Things can always get worse. That's what 2020 has taught us. Things can always get worse.
Yes. Things can always get worse. So on that really uplifting note,
Talk to you in 2 weeks, guys.
I hope we have better news in 2 weeks, but I would actually encourage a lot of our listeners, right? This is the end of the road for this Novel Baswedan asset attack case. There's actually a lot of stuff that you can read up on or watch, like stuff that he said, his interview with Najwa Shihab, Mata Najwa.
Uh-huh.
It might be 2 hours long, but
But there are...
if you watch it in like twice the speed, maybe you'll get through it faster.
which is what I did. Novel talks quite slowly in a very deliberate, careful way, as he is a prosecutor. But for some people, that might be slow, because I have a very short attention span. So what I did was I just played 2 times the speed, and I didn't lose anything, I think.
Listeners, we encourage you to read up on the case if you're interested, learn more about Novel's work before the acid attack and, the state of the KPK now.
I guess the thing you can do is, like, just listen about him, read about him, and maybe correct other people if they are talking about this crazy conspiracies about Novel.
Yeah.
I think that's the least we can do.
And honestly, one of the things, if there is one silver lining out of this, is that it's heartening to see a lot of the popular response to the verdict is disappointment, in that a lot of the netizens and a lot of the young people are like, why? This is so disappointing. Which, I guess, if I wanted to find a silver lining, is that the young people know what's up, right?
And I think in a way, like, you can be pessimistic like we are, but or maybe you can be more hopeful than we are. Like, good for you.
You should be.
But you should be. And I think we shouldn't, once an opportunity will present itself, I think in the future, we should try and make this country a better place still, in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And it might not be in a year, 2 years, 3 years, but eventually I think we will get somewhere. Like, and you know what? Like, if you want to be a prosecutor or a judge and you want to be a part of the system, do that, because people need people like that in the system. There's one thing about, I still believe in incremental progress. I think it's better to try for incremental progress than just give up and say, like, we need a revolution, because that's not really going to happen in the near future. But if it does, cool, I guess. I still think that we should hope for that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find more information and resources of whatever we talked about on our website, dialogika.id.
Music credits to John Dealey, Lee Roosevelt, and of course, Broke for Free.
If you like what you hear and want to support us, please review our podcast on the Apple Podcast app or whatever app you use to listen to your podcast. And please share our podcast with your friends. It's the best way to spread the word about Dialogika.
If you want to get more involved, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is dialogikapodcast@gmail.com, or just shoot us a message on our Facebook page.
You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and now Twitter. Please follow us in these various platforms. Our Twitter handle is @DialogikaPod. Also, follow me on Twitter. It's Steph Tank. That's STEPHTANGK.
Thank you again, and see you guys next time.
Bye!